The chandeliers in the grand atrium of the Silver Oak estate glittered like stars, casting a warm glow over the crowd gathered for our engagement party. Outside, a late autumn wind rattled the windows, a subtle reminder of the world beyond this opulent bubble. At 36, I, Nathan Caldwell, thought I'd found my future in Sarah, my fiancée of 6 months. We'd been together for 4 years. Our love forged in quiet moments, late-night walks through the city, shared playlists, and dreams of a life built on mutual respect. But tonight, as I stood in a tailored suit that felt more like a costume, I sensed a fracture in the foundation we'd built. Sarah and I met at a community theater production where she was designing costumes. Her creativity was magnetic. Every stitch she sewed told a story. I was a public librarian, passionate about preserving knowledge and helping people find their way. Our first date was at a hole-in-the-wall bookstore, where we laughed over obscure poetry collections until closing time. When I proposed under a canopy of fairy lights at her favorite park, it felt like the start of forever. But Sarah's family was a different story. Her parents, Edward and Lillian, were titans of their social sphere. Edward was a venture capitalist with a knack for turning failing startups into gold, while Lillian ran a foundation that funded arts programs, though her involvement was more about prestige than passion. They were polished, charismatic, and unrelenting in their need to control every narrative. At first, I thought their sharp comments were just their way of testing me. But over time, I saw how their arrogance tainted everything they touched. My mother, Clara, was their polar opposite. She passed away 3 years ago, after a brutal fight with pancreatic cancer. A nurse by profession, Clara had spent her life caring for others, often working double shifts to support families who couldn't afford medical care. She was the kind of person who'd slip a 20 into a patient's hand for bus fare or spend her day off helping a neighbor navigate Medicare. Her kindness wasn't loud, but it was profound, and it extended to Sarah's family in ways they never acknowledged. When Edward's venture capital firm hit a rough patch a decade ago, Clara stepped in. She introduced him to a network of ethical investors who stabilized his portfolio, saving his reputation and his fortune. She even helped Lillian secure a grant for her foundation, spending countless hours drafting proposals when Lillian's team dropped the ball. And when Sarah's younger sister, Rachel, was drowning in student debt after dropping out of law school, Clara paid off half her loans. No questions asked. Clara never sought praise, but the silence from Edward and Lillian, never a thank you note, never a gesture of gratitude, cut deeper than I cared to admit. Tonight, the engagement party was a spectacle of excess. The guest list was a curated mix of Edward and Lillian's elite circle bankers, philanthropists, even a state senator. Of the 120 people sipping martinis and admiring the ice sculptures, maybe 20 were from my side. My dad, my brother, Tom, and a handful of close friends from the library and my old college days. The rest were strangers who shook my hand with practiced smiles, their eyes already scanning for someone more important. I caught Sarah's eye across the room. She looked stunning in a sapphire gown, her laughter bright as she chatted with Edward's business partners. I wanted to believe her distance was just the chaos of the night, but a nagging doubt gnawed at me. This wasn't the intimate celebration we'd planned. It was a stage for Edward and Lillian to flaunt their influence. I overheard Lillian near the champagne fountain, her voice carrying over the string quartet. Sarah's always been our brightest star, she said to a group of her foundation donors. She's marrying someone. Well, let's just say he's a diamond in the rough, but she'll shape him into something worthy. The women around her laughed, and my stomach churned. I glanced at Sarah, hoping she'd shut it down, but she just smiled and raised her glass, as if it were all part of the charm. That was the first crack in the evening. I told myself it was nothing, that I was reading too much into it, but as the night unfolded, those cracks would widen into a chasm I couldn't ignore. The atrium was a whirlwind of clinking glasses and forced pleasantries. I tried to mingle, but every conversation felt like a performance. Edward's colleagues asked about my job with thinly veiled pity, as if being a librarian was a quaint hobby rather than a career. Lillian's friends made backhanded compliments about my simpler upbringing, their smiles dripping with condescension. I kept my responses polite, but the weight of their judgment pressed harder with every passing minute. Sarah was still orbiting her parents, her laughter a constant soundtrack to their self-aggrandizing stories. I wanted to pull her aside, to remind her this was our night, but she seemed untouchable, swept up in their world. My dad, a retired mechanic with a heart as big as Clara's, sat quietly at our table, looking as out of place as I felt. Tom, ever the protective older brother, shot me a look that said, "You okay?" I nodded, but I wasn't sure. As dinner was served, filet mignon and truffle risotto, a menu I had no say in, I noticed the seating arrangements. My family and friends were clustered at tables near the back, while Edward and Lillian's guests dominated the prime spots near the stage. It was a small detail, but it stung. A reminder that this event wasn't about us, it was about them. I leaned towards Sarah during a lull in the conversation. "Can we talk for a second?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "This doesn't feel like our party." She sighed, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "Nathan, relax. My parents just wanted to make it special. They know a lot of people. It's not a big deal." "It's a big deal to me," I said, my frustration slipping through. "Half these people don't even know us. And your mom's comments aren't helping." She rolled her eyes, a flash of irritation crossing her face. "You're being too sensitive. It's just how they talk. Let it go." Her dismissal hit like a slap. Sarah had always defended her parents, even when their jokes cut deep, like the time Edward remarked that I must be thrilled to be climbing the social ladder, or when Lillian suggested I could learn refinement from their family. I'd swallowed those slights for Sarah's sake, but tonight, they felt like a warning I couldn't ignore. As the plates were cleared, I steeled myself for the rest of the night. I didn't know it yet, but the worst was still to come. The Silver Oak Estate's atrium hummed with the clatter of dessert forks and the murmur of self-important chatter. I stood near the bar, nursing a second bourbon, trying to anchor myself in the chaos. Sarah was still tethered to her parents, her laughter a sharp contrast to the unease coiling in my chest. The engagement party was unraveling, not in a dramatic crash, but in a slow, insidious erosion. Every smile from Edward and Lillian felt like a calculated move, every glance from their guests a judgment. I wanted to believe it was just nerves, but the truth was clawing its way to the surface. My mother, Clara, lingered in my thoughts. Her absence was a quiet ache, but her presence was everywhere in the values she'd instilled. The way she'd shaped me. She'd been a beacon of selflessness, always putting others first, even when it cost her. I remembered the late nights she'd spent helping Edward's firm survive, poring over financial documents, with a focus that left me in awe. I remembered her driving Rachel to campus to re-enroll after her debt was cleared, her quiet pride when Rachel graduated. Clara never asked for recognition, but the way Sarah's family erased her contributions felt like a betrayal of everything she stood for. I circulated among the guests, forcing smiles as Edward's colleagues peppered me with questions about my quaint job at the library. "Must be nice to spend your days with books," one said, his tone dripping with condescension. "It's rewarding," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Helping people access knowledge is a privilege." He nodded, already looking past me for someone more interesting. Lillian's friends were no better, their compliments laced with pity. "You've got such a round charm," one woman said, as if I were a stray dog Sarah had taken in. I bit my tongue, but the slights were piling up, each one a brick in a wall between me and this family. The guest list imbalance was glaring now. My dad and Tom sat at a table with my friends, their laughter a small oasis in a sea of strangers. Meanwhile, Edward and Lillian's guests dominated the room, their conversations revolving around stock portfolios and exclusive vacation spots. I'd wanted a small, intimate party, maybe 50 people, split evenly between our families. Instead, this was a showcase for the Whittaker dynasty, with Sarah and me as props. I tried to catch Sarah's eye, but she was deep in conversation with a senator, her smile radiant but distant. I felt like a ghost in my own engagement, present but unseen. My dad caught my gaze and gave me a nod, his way of saying, "You've got this," but I wasn't sure I did. Then came the speeches. Edward took the stage, his presence commanding as he gripped the microphone. "Tonight, we celebrate our Sarah," he began, his voice booming over the room. "She's always been our pride, our legacy. And Nathan, He paused, a smirk playing at his lips. Well, he's lucky to be part of her story. The crowd chuckled, and I felt my jaw tighten. His speech was a masterclass in veiled insults, painting Sarah as a saint and me as an afterthought. Sarah's always known her worth, he continued, and Nathan's learning to keep up. More laughter. I gripped my glass, the bourbon burning in my throat. Lillian was next, her smile as sharp as her diamond earrings. Sarah's taught Nathan so much already, she said, her eyes locking onto mine with a patronizing warmth. He's got potential, but he's still finding his place in our world. The laughter was louder this time, and I felt the room shrink around me. I looked to Sarah, waiting for her to intervene, to say something to defend me, but she just clapped, her expression serene, as if her mother's words were a compliment. Then came the moment that broke me. Edward stood again, raising his glass. I want to acknowledge someone who's not with us tonight, he said, his tone shifting to a mock solemnity. Nathan's mother, Clara. My heart stopped. For a fleeting second, I thought he might honor her, but then he continued. Clara was one of a kind, always inserting herself into situations, offering help whether we asked for it or not. Generous, sure, but sometimes a bit overbearing. Wouldn't you say? He chuckled, and Lillian leaned in, adding, Oh, absolutely. Remember how she insisted on fixing our foundation's grant applications, like we didn't have it under control? The room went quiet, but Edward pressed on. We appreciated her, of course, but let's hope Nathan doesn't inherit her enthusiasm for meddling. He winked, and a few of his cronies laughed, their voices cutting through the silence like knives. I couldn't breathe. They were mocking my mom, her kindness, her sacrifices as if she were some nosy neighbor. Clara, who'd saved their empire, who'd given Rachel a second chance, who'd never asked for a single thing in return. And Sarah, sitting there, didn't flinch. She laughed softly, her hand resting on Lillian's arm, as if it were all a charming anecdote. I felt the bourbon glass slip in my hand, the world narrowing to a single point of rage. My mom's memory was sacred, a lifeline that had carried me through her loss, and they were trampling it, not just in private, but in front of a room full of their elite friends. I glanced at my dad, his face pale with anger, and Tom, whose fists were clenched under the table. My friends were staring, their eyes wide with shock. Even some of Sarah's relatives looked uncomfortable, their smiles faltering. I knew I couldn't stay silent, not this time. The laughter from Edward's speech hung in the air like a toxic fog, and I felt my blood boil. My mother's memory, her legacy of kindness, was being reduced to a cheap joke in front of a room full of strangers. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, and the room fell silent. Sarah's eyes widened, and she whispered, "Nathan, sit down." But her voice was a distant hum. My focus was on Edward, his smirk still plastered across his face. "Are you serious?" I said, my voice trembling, but carrying across the atrium. I locked eyes with him, my anger sharpening every word. "You're standing there, mocking my mother, the woman who saved your company, paid your daughter's debts, and never asked for a damn thing in return. And you think that's funny?" Edward's smirk faltered, but he leaned back, crossing his arms. "Relax, Nathan," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "It was just a bit of humor. No need to make a scene." "Humor," I snapped, stepping forward, my voice rising. "You called her overbearing. You said she meddled. She put her own money, her own time, into helping you when you were desperate. And this is how you repay her, by laughing at her memory in front of your fancy friends." Lillian stood, her voice sharp and cutting. "Nathan, you're embarrassing yourself. This is a celebration, not a platform for your grievances." "Embarrassing myself," I said, turning to her, my chest heaving. "You're the ones who decided to trash my mom in front of a room full of people who don't even know her. You turned her kindness into a punchline, and you expect me to just sit here and take it." Sarah stood now, her hands clenched at her sides. "Nathan, stop," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't know they were going to say that. You're blowing this out of proportion." "Blowing it out of proportion," I said, my voice breaking as I faced her. "You laughed, Sarah. You sat there and laughed while they mocked my mom. You didn't even try to stop them." The tension in the room was suffocating. My dad was glaring at Edward, his hands balled into fists, his face a mask of quiet rage. Tom looked ready to leap across the table, his eyes blazing with fury. My friends were frozen, their expressions a mix of shock and support. Even some of Sarah's relatives shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to the floor, as if they knew this had gone too far. Edward stood, his voice cold and authoritative. "If you're so offended, Nathan, maybe you should leave. This is our event, and we won't have it disrupted by your tantrum." For a moment, I considered it. I could walk out, leave them to their perfect little world, let them spin their narrative of me as the oversensitive fool. But then I thought of Clara, her strength, her dignity, the way she'd stood up for others even when it cost her. I couldn't let her memory be tarnished like this, not by people who owed her so much. I turned to the crowd, my voice steady now, though my heart was pounding. "This isn't just about tonight," I said, my words echoing in the silent room. "This is about respect. My mom deserved it, and so do I. She saved your family, Edward, when no one else would. She gave Rachel a second chance. Lillian, when you turned your back on her, she did it because she cared, not because she wanted your praise. And now you stand here, mocking her like she was nothing, and you expect me to stay silent." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. The room was a pressure cooker, every guest hanging on my next move. "If this is what being part of your family means," I continued, looking from Edward to Lillian to Sarah, "then I want no part of it. I can't marry into a family that disrespects me, my mother, and everything I stand for." I grabbed my jacket from the back of my chair, my movements deliberate. My dad stood immediately, his presence a quiet pillar of support. Tom grabbed his coat, shooting a glare at Edward that could have melted steel. My friends followed, their footsteps a soft echo of solidarity. Sarah called after me, her voice cracking. "Nathan, please, don't do this. We can talk about this." But I didn't stop. I walked toward the exit, the weight of 100 eyes on my back. The atrium doors loomed ahead, promising escape from this suffocating spectacle. As I reached for the handle, Lillian's voice cut through the silence. "Nathan, you're making a mistake," she said, her tone a mix of desperation and disdain. "You're throwing away everything over a few words." I turned, my hand still on the door. "No, Lillian," I said, my voice low but firm. "I'm walking away from a family that doesn't deserve me." I pushed through the doors, the cool night air hitting my face like a bomb. The wind had calmed, but the ground was slick with rain, reflecting the estate as lights in fractured patterns. My dad put a hand on my shoulder, his voice steady. "You did the right thing, son. Clara would be proud." Tom nodded, his jaw tight. "They had it coming. I'm just sorry it came to this." I nodded, but pride was the last thing I felt. I was angry, betrayed, and hollowed out by the realization that Sarah, the woman I'd loved for years, had let this happen. As we walked to the car, I knew this wasn't over. I'd stood up for my mom, but the fight was far from finished. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy with the scent of wet asphalt. As I stood in the Silver Oak Estate's parking lot, my dad and Tom stood beside me, their presence a quiet anchor in the storm of my emotions. I'd walked out of that atrium with my head high, my words still ringing in my ears, but the victory felt hollow. I'd stood up for my mom, for myself, but it wasn't enough. If I left things as they were, Edward and Lillian would rewrite the story, casting me as the irrational hothead who ruined their perfect night. They'd erase Clara's legacy, just as they'd erased her contributions. I couldn't let that happen. "I'm going back in," I said, my voice firm despite the knot in my stomach. Tom grabbed my arm, his eyes wide. "Nathan, no, you said what you needed to. Don't give them another chance to twist this." "This isn't about them," I said, meeting his gaze. "It's about me. I need to end this for good, on my terms." My dad hesitated, then nodded, his expression grim. "If this is what you need, we're behind you. But be careful." I took a deep breath and turned back toward the estate, my footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. The atrium doors loomed ahead, and as I pushed them open, the murmurs of the crowd washed over me again. The room was a tableau of shock and curiosity, every guest whispering to their neighbor, their eyes darting to me as I crossed the floor. Sarah was by the bar, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched a glass of wine. When she saw me, she rushed over, her voice breaking. "Nathan, what are you doing? Please, let's go outside and talk." "There's nothing to talk about," I said, brushing past her. I walked to the center of the room, the stage where Edward had delivered his venomous speech, still empty. I didn't need a microphone my voice would carry. "Everyone, I need your attention." The chatter stopped instantly, the room falling into a tense silence. My heart pounded, but I stood tall, my gaze sweeping over the crowd. Edward and Lillian were seated at their table, their expressions a mix of annoyance and unease. Sarah stood frozen by the bar, her eyes wide with panic. I took a deep breath and began. "I came back to make one thing clear," I said, my voice steady despite the fire in my chest. "This engagement is over. I can't marry into a family that disrespects me, my mother, and everything I believe in." Clara Caldwell was a woman who gave everything to others, including this family. I turned to Edward, my eyes locking onto his. "She saved your company when it was crumbling, Edward. She spent hours connecting you with investors, restructuring your deals, because she believed in you and on you, Lillian." I shifted my gaze to her. "She helped your foundation secure grants when you were too proud to ask for help. She gave Rachel a future when you'd written her off." The room was a vacuum, every guest hanging on my words. I could feel Sarah's stare, her desperation radiating across the space. "Clara didn't do those things for praise," I continued. "She did them because it was right. And tonight, you stood here, in front of all these people, and mocked her. You called her overbearing, a meddler, as if her kindness was a flaw. And Sarah—" My voice caught as I looked at her, the pain of her betrayal cutting deeper than I'd expected. "You laughed. You sat there and laughed, and you didn't say a word to stop them." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Nathan, no," she choked out. "I didn't mean it. We can fix this." "There's nothing to fix," I said, my voice softer now but unyielding. "You showed me who you are, Sarah. You showed me what this family is, and I can't live with that." Edward stood, his face red with fury. "You're making a colossal mistake, Nathan," he spat, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're throwing away everything, Sarah. This family, your future over a few words. You'll regret this." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the silence. "Everything. You think disrespecting my mom is nothing. You think treating me like I'm beneath you is nothing. No, Edward. The mistake would be tying myself to a family that doesn't deserve me. The mistake would be staying silent while you rewrite my mom's legacy to suit your ego." Lillian stood, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. "Nathan, let's not be hasty," she said, her hands clasped tightly. "This is an emotional moment. We can discuss this tomorrow, when everyone's had time to cool down." "No," I said, cutting her off, my voice like steel. "There is no discussion. There's no tomorrow. This is done." I turned to Sarah one last time. She was sobbing, her face crumpled with pain, her hands reaching out as if she could pull me back. "Nathan, please," she whispered. "I love you. Don't do this." "You don't," I said, my voice breaking despite my resolve. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have let this happen. You wouldn't have let them tear my mom apart in front of a room full of strangers." I stepped back, my eyes sweeping over the crowd one final time. "This isn't just about me," I said. "It's about standing up for what's right. For my mom, for her memory, for the values she taught me. I hope you all remember that." I turned and walked toward the doors, my footsteps deliberate, the weight of their stares heavy on my back. My dad and Tom were right behind me, their presence a quiet strength. My friends followed, their support a silent vow. As I reached the exit, Sarah's voice called out one last time, raw and desperate. "Nathan, please." I paused, my hand on the door, then pushed it open without looking back. The night air was cold, the stars hidden behind clouds, but I felt a clarity I hadn't known in years. I'd said what I needed to say. I'd stood up for Clara, for myself, and though my heart was heavy, I knew I'd made the right choice. The days after the engagement party were a storm of chaos and silence. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from Sarah, Edward, Lillian, and even Rachel, each one a variation of blame, apology, or manipulation. Sarah's texts were a desperate plea. "Nathan, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please, let's talk." Edward's were aggressive, laced with entitlement. "You humiliated us in front of everyone. You'll pay for this." Lillian played the victim, her words dripping with false remorse. "How could you do this to Sarah? She's devastated. Rachel's were the most surprising, a mix of guilt and deflection. I didn't know they'd go that far. Please don't hate me. I deleted them all, my resolve hardening with each notification. I threw myself into routine to keep the pain at bay. I spent long hours at the library, cataloging books and helping patrons with a forced smile. My dad and Tom checked in daily, their quiet support a lifeline. My friends rallied around me, inviting me to dinners and game nights. But the ache of Sarah's betrayal lingered like a bruise. I'd loved her with everything I had, and the realization that she'd let her family dismantle my mom's memory was a wound that refused to heal. A week later, Sarah showed up at my apartment. I'd been expecting it, dreading it, but nothing prepared me for the sight of her on my doorstep. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her eyes swollen from crying. She was still wearing the sapphire earrings from the party, a cruel reminder of that night. "Nathan," she said softly, her voice trembling, "can we please talk?" I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed, my heart a fortress. "There's nothing left to say, Sarah." I made myself clear. She flinched, but didn't back down. "I know I messed up," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. I was caught off guard. I didn't know how to stand up to them. "But I love you, Nathan. We can fix this." "Fix this," I said, my anger flaring. "You laughed while they mocked my mom. You let them treat me like I was nothing. That's not something you fix with an apology." She sobbed, her hands covering her face. I was scared. Okay, my parents, they're intense. I didn't know how to push back without making it worse. "But I'll talk to them. I'll make them apologize. Just don't end it like this." I shook my head, my voice cold. "It's not just about your parents, Sarah. It's about you. I needed you to have my back, and you didn't. I can't trust you anymore." She stared at me, her face crumpling as the reality sank in. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I love you. Don't do this. Goodbye, Sarah," I said, closing the door. The sound of her sobs echoed through the wood, but I didn't open it. I couldn't. The woman I'd loved was gone, replaced by someone who'd chosen her family's approval over my dignity. The weeks that followed were a blur of healing and distraction. I started running again, the rhythm of my footsteps a way to quiet my thoughts. I volunteered at a local literacy program, teaching adults to read, a nod to Clara's passion for helping others. My dad and Tom were my rocks, their presence a reminder that family didn't have to mean betrayal. Then, a month later, a discovery turned my world upside down. I was sorting through Clara's old desk, looking for a tax document, when I found a small velvet box tucked in the back of a drawer. Inside was a silver locket, engraved with my grandmother's initials. Was a family heirloom. One Clara had worn every day until her illness took her strength. I hadn't seen it since her funeral, and I'd assumed it was lost in the chaos of her final days. But something about the box felt wrong. It was too clean, too new. I dug deeper and found a crumpled receipt from a pawn shop, dated 2 weeks after our breakup. The description matched the locket exactly: silver, engraved, antique. My stomach dropped. Sarah had been at my apartment days after the breakup, returning a box of my things. She'd asked to use the bathroom, and I'd left her alone for a few minutes. Had she taken it? I grabbed my phone and texted her, my hands shaking. "Did you take my mom's locket?" Her reply was instant, but evasive. "What are you talking about? I wasn't buying it." "The locket from Clara's desk. It's gone, and you were the only one here. There's a pawn shop receipt. Sarah, what did you do?" She didn't respond for hours. When she finally did, her message made my blood boil. "I'm sorry, Nathan. I took it because I was angry. I pawned it to hurt you. I didn't think you'd find out." I stared at the screen, my rage mingling with disbelief. She'd stolen a piece of my mom, a piece of my family's history. Out of spite. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a violation, a final twist of the knife. I called her immediately, my voice tight with fury. "Nathan, I'm so sorry," she said when she picked up, her voice trembling. "It was a mistake. I was hurt, and I wasn't thinking." A mistake," I snapped. "You stole from me, Sarah. That locket was my mom's, my grandmother's. It's not some trinket you can just take because you're mad. How could you even think that was okay?" "I didn't mean to keep it," she said, sobbing now. "I pawned it, but I was going to get it back. I swear." "You didn't think I'd notice," I shouted. "That's not the point. You had no right to touch it, let alone sell it. Where is it now? It's at my parents' house, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I didn't want to lose it, so I left it there. I hung up, my mind racing. The locket wasn't just an object. It was a piece of Clara, a tangible link to her love. I had to get it back, no matter what it took. The drive to Edward and Lillian's mansion was a blur, my hands gripping the steering wheel as the locket's absence burned in my mind. Sarah's confession that she'd stolen my mom's locket, pawned it out of spite, had ignited a rage I hadn't known I was capable of. It wasn't just the act itself. It was the audacity, the betrayal layered on top of everything else. I'd walked away from her family, from her, to protect my mom's memory, and she'd found a way to wound me again. But I wouldn't let her have the last word, not this time. The Whitaker mansion loomed ahead, its manicured lawns and towering columns a testament to their wealth. I parked and marched to the front door. The locket's receipt crumpled in my pocket. My anger was a living thing, pulsing with every step, but I kept it in check. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine. Lillian answered the door, her smile as polished as ever, but it faltered when she saw my expression. "Nathan," she said, her tone cautious, "this is unexpected. What brings you here?" "I'm here for my mom's locket," I said, my voice cold. "Sarah stole it and left it here. I want it back." Lillian's face tightened, a mix of surprise and annoyance flickering across her features. "That's a serious accusation," she said, her voice clipped. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," I said, stepping forward. She admitted it. She took it from my apartment and pawned it to hurt me. "It's here, and I'm not leaving without it." Lillian hesitated, then stepped aside, her lips pursed. "Come in, let's sort this out." I followed her into the foyer, the opulence of the house a stark contrast to the ugliness of their actions. Sarah appeared at the top of the staircase, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She held the locket in her trembling hands, its silver surface catching the light. "Nathan," she said, her voice breaking, "I'm so sorry." I didn't respond. I walked up the stairs, my eyes fixed on the locket. She held it out, and I took it, inspecting it carefully. The engraving was intact, the clasp unbroken. It was Clara's, untouched by Sarah's betrayal. I pocketed it, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. "Nathan, please," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was angry, and I made a terrible mistake. Let me make this right." "You can't," I said, my voice low but firm. "You stole from me, Sarah, from my mom. You took something sacred and tried to erase it, just like your parents erased her kindness. There's no coming back from that." Lillian stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Nathan, you're blowing this out of proportion. This is a family matter, and we can resolve it privately. There's no need for this drama." "Drama," I said, turning to her, my anger flaring. "Your daughter stole a family heirloom because she wanted to hurt me. Your family mocked my mom's memory in front of a room full of people. This isn't drama, Lillian. This is who you are." Sarah sobbed, her hands covering her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I love you. Nathan, please don't do this." "You don't love me," I said, my voice breaking despite my resolve. "You love your family's approval, their world, their rules, but I'm done with it. I'm done with you." I turned to leave, the locket safe in my pocket. Lillian called after me, her voice desperate. "Nathan, you're making a mistake. You're throwing away everything, Sarah. This family, your future." I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm reclaiming my future, and it doesn't include you." I walked out, the door slamming behind me. The night was clear, the stars bright above the mansion's manicured lawns. I drove home, the locket, a quiet weight in my pocket, a reminder of Clara's strength, her love. I sat at her old desk, holding it in my hands, tracing the engraving with my thumb. It wasn't just an object, it was a piece of her, a testament to her legacy. In the weeks that followed, I cut all ties with Sarah and her family. I blocked their numbers, deleted their messages, and erased every trace of them from my life. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I questioned myself, when the pain of losing Sarah threatened to pull me under. But each time, I held the locket, felt its weight, and remembered Clara's words, "Stand up for what's right, even when it hurts." I threw myself into new beginnings. I started a community book club at the library, bringing people together through stories. I volunteered at a local shelter, helping families navigate the system, just as Clara had. I spent weekends with my dad and Tom, rebuilding our bond through fishing trips and late-night talks. I even began writing a blog about Clara's life, a way to share her legacy with the world. One evening, as I sat at her desk, the locket gleaming in the lamplight, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Calling off the engagement, confronting Sarah's family, reclaiming the locket. It had been the hardest fight of my life, but it was the right one. I'd stood up for myself, for Clara, for the values she'd taught me. And as I looked out at the city lights, I knew I was ready for whatever came next.